Now, for some insight, we're joined by Wang Jin, an associate professor with Northwest University in Xi'an. Professor Wang, thank you so much for coming on the show. So Hamas's attack, the largest in decades, and also taking in hostages. What is Hamas's endgame here?
I think the Hamas hopes to intervene the peace process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also remind the world that the Palestinian-Israeli peace process should not be ignored, because during the past decade, as you mentioned, this is a very, very even the strongest or even the most severe attack from Hamas and Jihad in Gaza Strip against Israel, because during the past decade, actually the world, or especially in many Middle Eastern countries, the Palestinian-Israeli peace process has been forgotten, has been ignored. Gaza Strip, especially the Gazan people, under the blockade and under the attacks from Israel, they are suffering. They are suffering from the shortage of the necessities and the shortage of the daily foods. So that is why the Hamas and the Jihad and other military groups inside Gaza, they hope to resist and struggle against the Israelis. And meanwhile, we cannot forget that during the past weeks, there has been more and more news about the possible normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia as a very leading country in the Arab world as well as the Islamic world. If the ties between between Saudi Arabia and Israel become normalized, it might become the new obstacles for the future's Israeli and Palestinian peace, because now more and more Arab people are started to forget about the Israeli and Palestinian peace process. So that is why I think the Hamas hopes to remind the world that the Israeli-Palestinian issue should not be forgotten through their own military and much more harsh and even some assertive manners towards Israelis through their attacks, Jiayang.
And Professor Wang, I want to ask you about the nature of this attack. So it was surprising, not just because it was sudden, but also for how planned and coordinated it was. So that's very different from how Hamas usually operates, isn't it? And what does that suggest?
I think it also suggests a new feature, because, as you mentioned, it is a very, very surprised attack, because traditionally in the Israeli and Palestinian conflicts, they are the result of set of upward spiral attacks. What I mean here is that, it's resulted from the very tiny conflict and the confrontations between the Israeli Jewish settlements and local Palestinian, especially in the Eastern Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And then this spread into the other parts of the Israeli society and other parts of the Palestinian society. And then finally, it led to the total confrontation between Hamas in Gaza and Israel's military forces. So this is traditionally, we're talking about the very escalation process. But now this is a very sudden attack from the Hamas and Jihad in Gaza Strip of Palestinians directly targets the Israeli targets in Israeli territory. So I think it is a very, very result of the Hamas and Jihad and other Israeli militant and political groups to hope to show the world that they should not be forgotten, and the Palestinian issues should be remembered and should be taken seriously by the rest of the world, especially by the Arab world and the Middle Eastern countries. Yeah.
So the fact that it did come as such a surprise, it raises the question, how did Israeli intelligence not see this coming?
I think it's you're right. I think it's a very big problem, and it's a big mistake made by Israeli intelligence as well, and the military establishments, because traditionally the Israeli military forces and military intelligence established, they have a very successful network covering and monitoring what is happening in the Gaza Strip. For example, they have the intelligence networks and covering what is going on inside the Gaza Strip, and what is the motivation and what is the latest movement for the Gaza Strip militants there. But now in this round of the new conflicts, we witnessed that the Hamas, they launched 5,000 missiles and rockets within the very short term. This has been ignored by the Israelis' intelligence. And also a large wave of the Palestinian militants, they crossed the border into the northern Israel. This has not been successfully prevented by the Israeli military forces and led to the very large casualties of Israeli civilians and military personnel. So I think this kind of mistake will be investigated after this war, and also I think the future reports will find out what's happened.
And it sounds like certainly neither side wants to back down. Do you think this conflict will escalate, and what could it escalate into?
I think it will escalate for sure, because for Israelis, they will take revenge. Their territory, especially in some towns, in the northern Israel, they are intervened, and also they are attacked by the Palestinians militants directly from Gaza, and also the rockets are so large with the rockets from Gaza directly targeting Israeli territory, and think this will make Israeli government and Israel military forces to revenge strongly against the civilians and military targets inside Gaza Strip, especially given the fact that the Gaza Strip is a very area populated by 2 million people, but just a very strip with very narrow, with very limited territory. So I think any attacks from Israeli government and military forces will lead to much more casualties inside Gaza. Gaza people, and also has already witnessed so many Israeli casualties. So I think in the future, this kind of conflict will be escalated, not only lead to much more casualties of civilians on both sides, but also will get to attention from all across the world and hope to help the both sides to pacify their tension.
Well, where does this leave peace talks then?
I think on the one hand, it will give new obstacles because it will add new hatred and had the new distrust to both Israelis and Palestinians in the future. But also, I think, in my personal point of view, I think they will give new hope, because it will make the Israel to rethink their policies against the Palestinians, because traditionally most of the Israelis, they have already get used to what has happened there. It's kind of the stalemate, and not to think about what will happen in the future about the Israeli peace with Palestinians. But now this round of new attacks has reminded the Israelis that, okay, now the Palestinian issue is still there. They have to make concessions, or they have to make efforts to help the Palestinians without another round of the new attacks against themselves. I think in the future, maybe new opportunities and new hopes will emerge between the two sides, especially the Israelis and the Palestinians, about the internal and lasting peace in the future.
And you were saying earlier that Hamas's intention is also to disrupt any chances of Israel normalizing relations with major players in the region like Saudi Arabia. Do you think this will work? And what about other wider regional consequences?
I think in the short term, of course, it will work, because Saudi Arabia still perceives itself as the very leader of not only Arab world but also the Islamic world. So they cannot make the normalization process realized with Israel against the backdrop that the very severe conflict between Israelis and the Palestinians are still going on. So the Saudi Arabia, they have to make concessions, or they have to reconsider what will happen next for their own credit of their nation, what their leadership image in the Middle East. So I think they cannot do it right now. But I mean, from the longer term, especially during the past years, more and more Arab states, they have already started to talk and to normalize ties with Israelis. I think this trend might not be stopped. But no matter what happened, we cannot forget that Israelis and Palestinian conflict are still there. We cannot forget that the Palestinians, their desires and their aspirations for independence, statehood. So I think this Palestinian people's rights should be respected and should be noticed by the international society, especially by the regional countries.
Well, this is certainly drawing attention to the region. Thank you so much, Professor Wang. Really appreciate your insights. Wang Jin with Northwest University in Xi'an.